The F.E.A.R universe is indeed a horrifying and chilling tale, with corporations hell-bent on profit and progression to the point they create an enemy they cannot hope to defend themselves from. In this video, you will be presented with the question of who the real monsters are, as we delve into the history and lore of this universe. However, this is a second part of a two-part history, as there are two timelines to choose from, the Monolith timeline and the Vivendi timeline. Last time we delved into the events of the Monolith timeline. In this video, we'll be looking at the Vivendi timeline, which will consist of the backstory, brief mentions of the events from the first game as it coincides with the events of F.E.A.R Perseus Mandate. So to get the full picture, I recommend watching the first part first. However, I will be providing context to where these events take place between the games, so you can understand what is happening in the first game while we are talking about Perseus Mandate. With that out of the way, let's get into the lore and history of the F.E.A.R Vivendi timeline. In the 1950s, a secretive military contractor that will eventually surface as the Armacham Technology Corporation had gone to the US government in order to buy the Armacham industrial compound located in the urban district of Fairport. The contractor did this in order to gain access to an old military complex that had been beneath the compound, which the compound would later be known as the Origin Facility, and the complex later on would house a device known as the Vault. In 1964, the military contractor is officially founded as the Armacham Technology Corporation, where they begin signing defense and aerospace contracts within their work, and 9 years later, they had begun their bioengineering program known as Project Icarus. Project Icarus had stemmed from studies on microgravity-related health problems, which would be best countered with exercise, but NASA wanted their subjects to maintain bone density during periods of both microgravity and stasis. The scientists had been supplied with test subjects who would be strapped down for months at a time and were fed a strict diet to maintain their desired weight. Despite their efforts, however, they were initially unable to find a solution to the decay of the subject's bone structure. The scientists on the project had then decided to develop a carbon filter composite that wasn't affected by the microgravity conditions, and on the plus side, it had been light enough to add more weight to an astronaut. The composite had been applied to the surface of the bones to help prevent the bone loss. However, this too had been unsuccessful. The corporation had then decided to use newly created replicas of the subjects so they could perform surgeries on them. These surgeries involved removing each of the subject's bones and replacing them with copies that had been created out of the composite, which eventually resulted in success, with the subjects not losing bone density. But something else had come from this success. The scientists had found that the light weight of the bone replacements had increased the subject's speed and dexterity that hadn't been seen before in humans. Despite of their success, however, the project would soon be shut down by the Department of Defense, since they had pulled out of the project in favor of a new operation that would be known as Project Perseus, and when Icarus would be shut down, all of the subjects would be placed in containment where they would remain until the future. On the 26th of August 1979, Harlan Wade's wife Elizabeth had gone into labor where she had given birth to Alma Wade. Harlan Wade had been a scientist who worked for the Armacham Technology Corporation, who would eventually pioneer Project Origin. Over the course of the next 3 years, Alma would show signs of being mentally unstable, where she had suffered from fits of hysteria, delusions, and vivid nightmares. Harlan at this time had told one of his co-workers, Marshall Disler, about the issues his daughter had been facing, where he theorized that Alma could be telepathic, and after some more observations, Harlan would tell the rest of the corporation that his daughter might hold some psychic abilities, and the corporation had taken an interest in Alma. During this time, the US military had been going through a communication struggle in Vietnam, and they wanted to remedy that issue, and the corporation had thought if they were able to give people telepathic abilities, then this would give the commanders the ability to communicate with the front lines with just a mere thought. Armacham scientists had then taken Alma to a facility where she would be tested, which she had completed each and every one put to her with flying colors. It was indeed a fact that Alma did have telepathic abilities. Unfortunately for her, this would only lead into further experimentation, and the scientists were relentless in their pursuit of the source to her powers. During her time at the facility, Alma continued to suffer from nightmares which progressed into frequent hallucinations and weak epileptic episodes. Eventually in 1984, Alma grew tired of these experiments, so she had decided to begin failing the tests in hopes that they would just let her go. But when this didn't work, she tried a more direct approach when she began to intrude on the scientists' minds, giving them vivid nightmares, delusions, and sudden mood swings. Eventually, Alma had been sedated, and the corporation had theorized that Alma could have done worse things if not for her young age, and if she was able to develop her abilities, then there would be no telling what she could do. Harlan during these years began to plan out Project Origin, where the corporation had recommended that Alma be contained out of fear for her powers.
Harlan, this can't go on. She's too dangerous.
You're telling me to seal my daughter away.
You knew it would come to this. We both knew.
And on the 24th of August 1987, Alma had been transferred to the Vault, which had been a spherical device that had been housed with a powerful force field which would be used to deflect Alma's psionic powers. 2 days from her 8th birthday, Alma had been placed into an induced coma so the scientists could avoid any further complications from occurring. In their research, Harlan theorized that the origins of Alma's powers wasn't inherited from both him and his wife, since they didn't have any sort of abilities. However, the scientists thought that maybe Alma could pass these abilities down to her offspring, and over the course of 7 years, the scientists put their theory to the test, where they had taken samples from their own DNA, which included samples from Alma's father too, in order to create 2 prototypes in a lab, which they had then impregnated Alma with these 2 prototypes, forcing her to carry them against her will. And in 1994, the time had come with the scientists removing Alma from the Vault and taking her to the birthing facility in order to put her through an artificial labor operation. And in the course of the procedure, Alma had awoken temporarily.
You will be a god among men. Take her back to the Vault.
In the following year, the scientists had removed Alma from the Vault in preparation to receive her second child at the age of just 16, who would later be known as Paxton Fettel. Over the years, Harlan and the operatives would test the 2 boys to find out if they were capable of becoming psychic commanders, with the tests being ruthless and abusive. In one of these tests, the young point man had been pitted against a soldier into fist-to-fist combat, where he failed defeating his adversary, which resulted in Harlan smacking him over the head with a bucket, and the only words of encouragement had been to move faster, telling the boy to show him he was worth something to him. In another test, one of the boys had been strapped down to a table with his mind being hooked up to a set of machines, where Harlan continued to shout at them, yelling at them to focus, to show him how special they are, until they eventually fell unconscious from the test. The boys would live in a large room together with a set of beds and a screening window, so the scientists could see their experiments in their spare time, or as Paxton had put it, to see their rats play. In another test, the young point man watched on in horror as Harlan encouraged Paxton to destroy the soldier in front of him at the cellular level, and eventually Paxton succeeds where his brother had failed, which results in him becoming Harlan's new favorite out of the 2 brothers, while the first had been worthless, a failed experiment, a tool to be dismantled or thrown away. The corporation stopped using Alma as a mere breeder, but they decided to keep her alive, just in case something was to happen to Paxton, and so they had locked her back in the vault, to be induced into another coma, only to be used as a tool for the corporation's needs. 2 years after this event, Harlan Wade had copyrighted Paragon Fitness and a training manual, with them being accredited to him. In 2002, the US Army had created the F.E.A.R unit in order to combat paranormal threats to national security. However, the team's work had rarely been taken seriously due to how unbelievable the threat had been. However, they would soon find out just how real the threat was. At the age of 10, Paxton Fettel had established a telepathic link with his comatose mother while she had been imprisoned inside the vault, which causes them to merge their consciousness together, resulting in Paxton becoming violent and killing 7 of the Project Origin staff with his enhanced strength and his mental abilities. The onslaught, however, soon ended when the corporation had successfully contained Paxton, where he would remain in his new violent state of mind. The corporation had then conducted an investigation that concluded that Alma was to blame for this incident occurring, and so they deemed her to be a liability, which resulted in her immediate termination when they gave the order to remove Alma's life support, leaving her to die in her isolated prison. After killing her, Paxton had reverted to a normal state of mind, with him claiming that he couldn't recall his actions in the past events. This event would later be known as the first synchronicity event. It would take Alma 6 days before she would eventually perish inside of the vault. But strangely enough, even after her heart had stopped beating, Alma's psychic signature remained, as if her trauma and her anger was so great that not even death itself could hold her spirit back. After this, the people of Fairport had begun to be plagued with physical symptoms of illness, such as nausea and headaches, when visiting the Auburn district, which is where the Origin facility had been located. This sudden case results in the residents leaving and avoiding the area altogether. Following these events, the Origin facility and their operations had been shut down, with the facility being sealed, leaving the site to gather dust throughout the years. It is unknown if the Point Man had been born with his extremely quick reflexes, or if he had been experimented on further in order for him to be worth something in Harlan's eyes. However, the military was very interested in drafting the Point Man, due to the fact that the Point Man's reflexes had been 5 times quicker than any other human in history. 4 years later, in 2009, Armacham had created a new project, codenamed Project Perseus, which had been an experiment to see if Paxton could synchronize a group of cloned super soldiers to see if he could issue out orders to them with the power of his mind. The project had been located in an underground facility known as the Perseus Compound, or as it was originally called, the ATC Cloning Facility, which helped Paxton to develop his abilities, something the corporation would later regret. However, the project had also given rise to the development of the replica forces in response to the Department of Defense's directive to create super soldiers who could be commanded telepathically, and they would later establish the replica forces in 2017. And 2 years after this, Paxton would be successful in creating a link between him and the replica forces. Over these years, however, Paxton began to have disturbing dreams of killing people and cannibalizing them, tearing them to shreds while indulging in the consumption of their flesh. When the corporation had found out about these dreams, they decided to look deeper into this matter. However, their investigations came up only to dead ends. They even looked into the possibility of Alma somehow being behind these dreams, but they found no evidence of a link between the two. In 2025, the events of F.E.A.R had been taking place, with Paxton assuming command over the replica forces with the power of his mind, and the F.E.A.R unit had investigated into the crisis, which eventually spreads to the Armacham HQ, and in response to this, Delta had sent in several units to defend the corporation, which results in a bloodbath. They also send in a recon team, with them finding hardly any resistance to halt their progress, until they came across the spirit of Alma, who had liquefied them from the inside out, with her bursting blood vessels, melting their internal organs and eventually dissolving their skin and clothes, leaving nothing but their skeletons remaining. The Point Man and the team had eventually been sent into the chaos, gripping the HQ, which the events continue as normal until we reach the assassination of Bishop, and the ATC security forces had killed him. This is where the timelines begin to divert away from each other, where the Senator had contacted Gavin Morrison, telling him to secure the source, and Armacham's Perseus project. In order to accomplish this mission, he hires the Nightcrawler mercenaries to aid him in his goals. Rodney had then organized a second F.E.A.R team to land near the Armacham headquarters, where they are tasked with securing evidence of the Perseus project, which brings us into the events of F.E.A.R Perseus Mandate.
This Armacham situation than we thought.
Isn't there already a F.E.A.R team on the ground?
There it is. But ATC security just murdered our primary contact, Alma's Bishop. And fighting is spread throughout the city.
They're supposed to be on our side. Didn't ATC call us in to help them in the first place?
What's ATC hiding?
We don't know yet. Your mission is to secure Armacham's global data and security center, retrieve any information related to a project codenamed Perseus.
Paxton Fettel and his army of replicas?
That may just be the tip of the iceberg. Sat images have picked up enemy activity near the landing zone, so be careful. Head directly to ATC's data center once you're on the ground. As always, I'll be in radio contact with you throughout the mission. Begin your jump prep.
Time to fly.
where the second team had been sent in with the support of the sergeant, who enters the sewers to eliminate the replica patrols. While the chaos of the firefights had been occurring, the Nightcrawler teams had reached Fairport. After the Point Man had failed to intercept Alice, Delta Force had sent in Pansalakwa with another team into the Armacham Data and Research Center, and the sergeant had reached the streets, where he encounters resistance from more replica forces and the ATC security forces. As Paxton had been searching for the vault, the Nightcrawler forces had located and infiltrated the Armacham Data and Research Center, where they kill most of the personnel inside, and they even end up setting up an ambush for Pansalakwa's team shortly after their arrival, where the Delta team suffered heavy casualties from the attack. As the chopper carrying the Point Man, Jin, and Holiday had been shot down and crashed into the apartment complex, the second F.E.A.R team had rendezvoused at the data center, where the sergeant had eliminated the Nightcrawler forces in the center, which allows his team to reach the Delta Force, and the sergeant had left them to search for the mainframe in order to retrieve the data. The Nightcrawler forces, who had been joined by Morrison, had moved towards the Armacham Bioresearch facility and successfully infiltrates the facility. After this, the sergeant had been successful in his mission to retrieve the data required for the mission. Pansalakwa's squad at this time had been taken out of the research center, where they are soon evacuated, and Steve Chen and David Rains, who are the two members of the sergeant's team, had been ordered to go back into the center. Back inside, the sergeant had been on his way to reunite with the other members of the team and to get to the evacuation point. However, his progress had been halted by not just the Nightcrawlers, but also by Alma. At the time of the medical team reaching Jin and Holiday, and the Point Man descending into the depths of the Origin facility, the 2nd F.E.A.R team and Delta Force under the command of Passalaqua had been dropped off at the ATC's plaza, which is located just outside of the bio-research facility, and the two teams had secured the area, allowing the sergeant to enter the facility, and Steve Chen had infiltrated the archive building. While the Point Man had been disrupting Norton's attempts to destroy the records of the Origin facility, the sergeant had encountered heavy resistance from the Nightcrawler forces and a Rev 8 power armor. The commander of the Nightcrawlers had then ordered a 2nd team to be sent into the Perseus compound, where he betrays Morrison before leaving him behind with the Source. After the Point Man had eliminated Paxton, the replica forces had shut down. Morrison had made his way out of the facility but found that the ATC security had been tasked with taking him down. However, they were also deployed to eliminate the 2nd F.E.A.R team, but it was them who were quickly dispatched by the sergeant as he pursued Morrison, and they eventually caught up with him. But then, the Origin facility had given out a huge explosion, which throws the city into complete chaos and allows Morrison to escape the 2nd F.E.A.R team's clutches, as the sergeant had been knocked unconscious and David Rains had gone missing, and Norton had somehow managed to escape the facility before the explosion could occur and manages to survive. After the ending to F.E.A.R had occurred, with Alma forcing the helicopter to crash, Steve Chen and the sergeant had made their way through the underground metro while encountering dead replicas and other paranormal occurrences. However, the two would soon be separated when they are attacked by a group of shades who move like the replica assassins in hit-and-run attacks, all the while being transparent and barely visible, making them a formidable foe. The sergeant, however, attempted to follow Steve, but had been held back by Alma, which had allowed a group of shades to ambush and nearly kill Steve, but he is soon reunited with the sergeant, and when he was about to leave with him, he is suddenly attacked and killed by a creature known as a scarecrow.
Somebody's got my leg.
And if things couldn't get any worse, Paxton Fettel had been revived as a phantom, and a thunderstorm had begun in Fairport. The sergeant at this time had continued with his mission to track down Morrison, who at this time had gotten into contact with the Nightcrawler forces in the underground, where he is then startled by Alma before he flees, where the events of F.E.A.R Extraction Point and Perseus Mandate begin to coincide with each other, as the Point Man, Holiday and Jin had survived the crash, while the helicopter pilots had been killed, where they found themselves inside of an apartment building once again, and as soon as they leave, they spot several replicas who had been deactivated, but then a US Air Force plane had fallen out of the sky and crashed in Fairport. David Rains at this time had regained contact with the sergeant as he moves past the crash site, where he notes the loss of Steve Chen and the explosion of the Origin facility had been preventing contact from the outlying region regions, and Rains believes that the first F.E.A.R team had perished in the explosion, unknowing of how alive they really were. Rains then orders the sergeant to track down Morrison so they can interrogate him. As the sergeant had been moving through the train yard, the point man had entered the church where he encounters Paxton, where Paxton reactivates the replica forces under his control, and after the point man engages in a fight, Alma shows up where she opens an underground passage for the point man to enter. As he navigates through the underground area, the thunderstorm outside had let up, with the weather clearing up. Jin is then abducted by the replica forces, and Alma leads the point man out of the underground with the aid of her shades. But as the shades had been leading the point man out of the underground, they had been antagonistic towards the sergeant, as they attacked him viciously with their speed, but eventually he is ambushed by two power armors as well. At this time, the Nightcrawlers had been busy dealing with the replicas outside of their temporary base, which the sergeant manages to infiltrate and find out who their contractor had been. But while this had been happening, Jin had managed to escape from the replica forces, where she links back up with the point man and Holiday. At this time, survivors of the Delta Force teams had managed to set up an extraction point at the Auburn Memorial Hospital, which the point man and Jin are soon made aware of this by Holiday. But the point man at this time still had his hands full as he fends off the replica forces, but eventually after a lengthy battle he reaches Holiday's position. The senator at this time had been communicating with the Nightcrawlers, where he orders them to leave Fairport immediately. However, at this time they disregard the command and continue as planned, where they had captured Gavin Morrison, who was being held in a cell, but eventually is located by the sergeant, who pleads to be let out, and in his pleas he reveals the Nightcrawlers' plans to them, that they want to kill him, but they also plan to invade the Perseus facility in their search for Alma's DNA. The sergeant then opens the cell where Gavin leads him through the container yard and into a passageway, where on their journey Paxton appears to them, where he implies he was expecting them before disappearing back into the shadows. And after finding some dead scientists, Morrison had been presented with a vision from Alma, where she had catapulted a truck at him, which instantly kills him. At this time, Holiday and the point man had come across a large number of bodies, and Holiday soon moves towards a flickering light, which causes more and more phantoms to begin appearing as the light flickered, where Holiday tried to shoot them all as they appeared, but he is soon grabbed by Alma and beaten relentlessly by the phantoms, and when they were done with him, he was thrown out of the room where he had his limbs crushed, and he is then again thrown, but this time out of the warehouse. When the point man eventually finds Holiday, he sees that he is dead, left lying still on a windowsill, and when he approached the corpse, Alma had taken it away from him to be liquefied.
Fine, Jin.
The sergeant at this time had been moving through the supply tunnels, where he encounters more Nightcrawlers who seem to be headed in the same direction, and after he had dispatched those who were sent to kill him, Rains had contacted him through a Nightcrawler radio, where he tells him that he had secured some schematics of the Perseus compound. As the point man had been traveling through the subway complex, Alma appears to him, who leads him through the complex, where she even liquefies several of the replicas who had been in his way, but then she had sent in several shades to begin attacking him without warning. She then appears to the point man in her adult form, but strangely enough, she still gives him assistance. Through his travels, the sergeant had managed to leave the tunnels and towards the surface, which led him into a warehouse where a team of Nightcrawlers had been waiting for him, but after dispatching them, the floor suddenly collapses, forcing him to travel through the dark tunnels once again. again. The remaining Nightcrawlers at this time had reached the Perseus compound, where they began to move inside, leaving a patrol outside to guard their position, where the sergeant had caught up to them, engaging in a firefight with this patrol. The point man at this time had reached the orange line, where Alma continues to assist him by liquefying the replica forces who began to attack him. Meanwhile, Paxton had confronted Jin, but he promises not to bring harm to her, where he gives her a warning that Alma may not be so generous and may just attack her on sight. Jin then moves to the hospital, where she notifies the point man upon her arrival. The point man had then spotted Norton inside of a store, where he offers him a way out to escape, but then Alma scares him back inside. As the sergeant had been dispatching the remaining Nightcrawler forces, Paxton had appeared to him, telling him of how Armacham had robbed Alma of her childhood, her children, and ultimately her life. Alma had then appeared inside the compound to meet the Nightcrawlers, where she attacks them while they had been documenting the compound, wiping the team out. However, the other units had been with the commander, who had been moving deeper into the facility in search for the vault. Paxton at this time had appeared to the point man after the replicas had used explosives to blow up the subway, telling him that he cannot run away from this. The point man, however, continued to move from the parking lot he had been thrown to from the explosion and into an office building, but while there, Alma and Jankowski had appeared to him to tell him to hurry on to the hospital. But as that was happening, several shades had assaulted the hospital, where they claimed the life of Jin. As dawn came to Fairport, the point man had reached the hospital, but it had become a free-for-all battleground between the point man, Alma, and the replicas under the command of Paxton. But eventually Alma had tipped the scales of battle in her favor against the replica forces. All the while, Alma had been sending her apparitions after the Nightcrawlers, fighting a battle on two fronts, and the sergeant had been descending down as he fought against the two opposing forces. Alma had then taken the point man down to an area where she merged her two forms into one, and just then Rodney was able to contact the point man, where he tells him to get to the roof of the hospital. As the sergeant traversed the deep recesses of the compound, Paxton appears to him again, explaining to him of how Armacham had attempted to protect him from Alma, and even remarks of how he reminds Paxton of his brother. At this time, the replica forces had arrived at the Perseus compound, where they begin to infiltrate it. All the while, the Nightcrawler teams had tried to halt the sergeant's progress, where they are again assaulted by Alma after they had opened the vault. As morning came, the world outside had begun to be covered with a thick orange hue blanketing the sky. The point man had then gone to the extraction point on the hospital roof, only to see the helicopter destroyed right in front of him, which the explosion throws him against a wall, knocking him unconscious. Back in the depths of the Perseus compound, the Nightcrawler commander manages to retrieve a sample of Alma's DNA and calls in for an extraction, where the sergeant gave chase, pursuing the commander through the compound as the replica forces engaged in battle with both the Nightcrawlers and the sergeant. However, against all odds, the sergeant remained victorious against those who stood in his way, and eventually he manages to catch up to the Nightcrawler commander, where he confronts and defeats him, securing Alma's DNA, where the sergeant regroups with David Rains on the surface, as the replica forces had assaulted the area surrounding them. But they call in for an extraction, and eventually the two of them are extracted from Fairport.
Son, team's gonna need a new lieutenant after this. I think Janet wanted to be you.
After this, the point man had come to, where he staggers towards a railing, only to see the entire city had gone up in flames.
Planted the seeds of their doom. But she would not be forgotten. We will make them remember. They will die. All of them.
However, one Nightcrawler elite had managed to survive against the odds, where he had met with David Hoyle, presenting a sample of Fettel's DNA. When the senator asks about the losses, the elite just tells him that they were acceptable numbers. And that is it for the Vivendi timeline of the F.E.A.R. universe, where yes, it wasn't as long as the monolith timeline, but I think it was just as good. But tell me how you feel about it in the comments down below, along with a game series you would like me to cover in the future, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already for more content like this in the future. A special thank you goes out to the members of the channel. Your extra mile support is always greatly appreciated, and if you want to join the roster of the names listed here, then become a member for more exclusive rewards, including early access to new videos and updates for what I'm currently working on. And I hope to see you back here on the next one, and be sure to leave having a good one.